imagine stepping outside on a clear night, right? And you look up that huge dark canvas just full of stars. For literally millennia, humans have looked up, totally captivated by those lights, wondering, not just what is out there, but who are we in relation to all that? From ancient stargazers mapping everything out to the massive roar of rockets launching today, our fascination with space, it feels primal. It's just part of us.
It really is. That kind of fundamental curiosity, it's always pushed us to look beyond Earth. But, what started as this purely national thing, often a really fierce competition between superpowers, well, that's changed fundamentally. It's a huge shift we're seeing now.
And that shift, that transformation, that's exactly what we're diving into today. This deep dive is tackling, well, the ultimate question, really. Who actually controls space right now? Is it still governments with their, big national plans? Or have private companies, these super ambitious, often billionaire-led ventures, have they really taken the reins? And maybe even more important, what does this massive change actually mean for humanity's future, both here on Earth and, as we maybe go further out?
Yeah, and for this deep dive, we're drawing on a pretty solid stack of sources. One really useful overview is called Tech and Future, Space Tech and Exploration, Private Space Companies versus Governments Who Control Space. We're going to basically unpack the whole timeline, starting from those intense Cold War rivalries that first got us into orbit, all the way to today's really complex, commercially driven spacing.
Right. And our mission today isn't just about the rockets and the tech. We really want to dig into the deep psychological reasons behind it all, the geopolitics, how that's always changing, and the really big ethical questions that come with this huge shift. Our goal is to give you, the listener, a kind of shortcut, a way to get really well informed about all these forces shaping our future out there. And hopefully we'll hit on some surprising facts, some engaging ideas that make you think too.
Because understanding this dynamic, who's funding it all, who's making money from it, who's actually setting the rules for this new frontier, it's absolutely crucial. Whether you're into tech or global power shifts or just curious about where humanity is heading beyond Earth, this stuff impacts you. Directly, often in ways you might not even realize yet.
Okay, so let's kick this off with a real bang. Almost literally. The Big Bang of the space age. It all goes back to October 4th, 1957. That's the day the Soviet Union, the USSR, launched Sputnik 1. Now picture this. It was just this small, polished metal ball, maybe basketball-sized, with these 4 long antennas sticking out. But it circled the Earth, sending back those famous beeps. And those beeps, they weren't just, a signal. They signaled the start of a whole new era.
Oh, it was an absolutely profound moment. Seriously profound. Sputnik wasn't just cool tech. It was like a geopolitical bombshell. It sent shockwaves everywhere, especially in the U.S. It immediately kicked off the Cold War space race. There was this sudden, terrifying feeling in America that they were behind, seriously behind, in this critical new area.
And the U.S. response, it was fast, really fast and decisive. Just a year after Sputnik, 1958, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration was officially created. And, we think of NASA now for exploration, for science. But back then, its main job was explicitly about national security. It was about competing directly with the Soviets. The message was crystal clear. This wasn't just about exploring for knowledge. It was about winning, beating the other side to the stars.
The cultural impact in the U.S. was just immense. Sputnik didn't just create fear, it spurred this massive investment. Congress poured money into science, tech, engineering, math, STEM fields. It basically reshaped American education and the public. They became fascinated with space, absolutely obsessed, fueled this national drive to catch up and then hopefully pull ahead. It really galvanized the whole country, changed its focus, its resources in a way that very few single events ever do.
And behind these massive national projects, there were some truly remarkable, sometimes kind of mysterious people. On the Soviet side, you had Sergei Korolev. He was so central to their early wins that they just called him the chief designer. His actual identity was a state secret for decades, even after he died. Shows you how secret the Soviet program was. He was the genius behind all those early Soviet breakthroughs, Sputnik, Yuri Gagarin's flight. He designed the rockets that kept putting the USSR first.
And then for the Americans, you had Wernher von Braun. Now, he's a really complex figure. His past is deeply controversial. He was actually a former Nazi rocket scientist. After World War II, the U.S. brought him over in Operation Paperclip. And then he becomes this absolutely central figure in the American space program. It's a strange paradox, right? A guy with that kind of history who designed the V-2 rockets used against the Allies ends up being an American hero. He designed the Saturn V, the rocket that took Apollo to the moon. His contributions were huge, no doubt. but they definitely come with this heavy moral baggage that historians still debate today.
It's kind of mind-blowing, isn't it? These personal stories mixed up with these huge historical moments, these individuals often working under crazy pressure, in total secrecy, or yeah, with these big moral questions hanging over them. They shaped the whole story of early space exploration. And then you get the human icons. Yuri Gagarin, 1961, first human in space. His quick trip around Earth made him a global star, a symbol of Soviet victory. And then, of course, Neil Armstrong, Apollo 11, 1969, stepping onto the moon, saying that line, "One small step." Everyone remembers it. These guys weren't just pilots or scientists. They became like global cultural symbols. They represented their whole nation's tech power on the world stage. And they captured our imagination in a way that honestly still resonates today.
Yeah, they captured the human imagination. Pure science or engineering rarely does that on the same scale. They became living proof of what humanity could do and, by extension, what their countries could do. Those images, Gagarin and his capsule, Armstrong on the moon, they're instantly recognizable. They bring up feelings of national pride, sure, but also this shared human sense of wonder.
So you have this amazing period of state power, Gagarin in 61, Apollo 11 in 69. That felt like the absolute peak, right? But then came 1986, the Challenger disaster. That was just heartbreaking. Millions watching live as the shuttle broke apart. Looking back, it really showed the risks, the weaknesses of relying only on government programs, especially when things like budgets and bureaucracy might, compromise safety.
Absolutely. Challenger was a terrible wake-up call. It showed the huge dangers and, frankly, the limits of just having governments lead space efforts. And while it was incredibly tragic, a real national trauma, it might have kind of inadvertently opened the door for private companies. It exposed the stiffness, the risks of the old model. It made people ask, are there other ways, maybe more agile ways, maybe even safer ways to do this? It definitely forced a rethink about how space exploration should be run and funded.
And then, jump forward to 2001. Another key moment, kind of a sign of things to come. Dennis Tito. He was this wealthy American engineer and entrepreneur, and he became the first real space tourist. He didn't go with NASA, though. He actually paid Russia, the Russian space agency, something like $20 million to fly him up to the International Space Station. That was a massive signal, a crack in the old government-only system. It showed space wasn't just for nations anymore. There was a potential commercial market there. A new era was quietly starting.
Tito's trip really was a clear sign of the commercial future of space access. It showed that if you had enough money, you could basically find your own way to orbit, outside the usual government paths. And that really set the scene for what we now call the new space era. You had Elon Musk starting SpaceX in 2002. His goal was audacious: make space travel common. Then Jeff Bezos started Blue Origin in 2004 with this long-term vision of people living and working in space. These weren't just companies, they marked a definitive shift. Private ambition, private money, and a totally different way of thinking about innovation were now in the driver's seat.
And it all seemed to really come together in 2020, a truly historic moment. SpaceX's Crew Dragon became the first privately owned and operated spacecraft ever to take astronauts to the International Space Station, a job that used to only belong to national space agencies. That was huge. It wasn't just another launch. It cemented the idea that private companies weren't just like taxi services for satellites anymore. They were now essential partners in human spaceflight itself, trusted with astronauts' lives.
Yeah, it was powerful proof of how far things had come from those purely government missions. But speaking of control and how things could have gone differently, here's a kind of lesser-known fact that makes you think. Before Apollo 11 landed humans on the moon in '69, the Soviets had actually successfully tested a robotic rover, the Lunokhod. They tested it on Earth, getting ready for a moon mission.
Seriously, a robot rover potentially beating humans to the moon. That's wild.
Yes. And imagine if that rover had succeeded first on the moon. If the Soviets had prioritized sending a robot and it worked before any humans stepped foot there, history might look totally different. We might not have that iconic image of the boot print in the dust. Maybe our collective memory of the moon would be rover tracks instead. It really highlights how the human element, the sheer drama, the iconic nature of a person doing something unprecedented, completely shaped the story and grabbed our imagination in a way a machine, no matter how smart, just couldn't. It shows that deep human desire to actually be there.
That's a really powerful thought experiment. It makes you realize how much our memory, our whole drive for space, is tied up in human achievement, not just the technology itself. Okay, so we're shifting from this government-led story to one that's more and more shaped by private money and ambition. Beyond the rockets and the politics, there's a deeper question, isn't there? Why do we even want to go to space? What's the basic human drive?
That is a deep question, yeah.
Yeah.
And it really connects space exploration to some core human drives. If you look at psychology like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you could see space exploration as fulfilling that top level. Self-actualization. That's the ultimate human need, right? The urge to reach your full potential, to go beyond limits, push boundaries, find meaning beyond just everyday life. It's about striving, achieving incredible things.
It's not just about science or resources, it's deeper, like a spiritual need for humanity to grow, to achieve more.
Exactly. And Carl Jung, he had this concept of the collective unconscious, a shared universal part of our minds, full of archetypes, ancient images. From that perspective, the cosmos, space itself, reflects that shared part of us. The sky becomes this huge canvas for our collective dreams, our hopes for new starts, our old myths, and also our deep fears of the unknown. It taps into those universal stories that echo across cultures.
Okay, that makes sense why we're also drawn to it then. And speaking of being drawn in, look at the behavior, the public spectacle around space. Apollo didn't just send guys to the moon, it turned astronauts into actual mythic heroes. People worshiped them. Today, the spectacle's different, but just as big. Those SpaceX launch live streams, they pull in millions, sometimes tens of millions, of people watching live all around the world.
It absolutely shows this enduring human need for spectacle, for something extraordinary, for heroes. And as a society, we tend to project our own hopes, our desires for progress onto these figures. Especially with modern entrepreneurs like Musk and Bezos, they get cast as these modern kings or gatekeepers to the new frontier. It reflects the societal wish for bold leadership, especially when maybe governments seem too slow or too cautious. This puts huge pressure and expectations on them, of course.
And the way we see it has changed so much too, right? You think of those old, fuzzy, black and white TV pictures from Apollo. Huge moment, yeah, but technically basic now. We get these slick HD live streams, multiple cameras, amazing sound, commentary from engineers, even the astronauts sometimes. Both eras grabbed everyone's attention, for sure. But the modern way is so much more immersive. It brings space right into your living room, onto your phone.
Definitely. But amidst all this excitement and tech progress, you hit these serious sociological issues, especially this tension between elitism and maybe possibly democratization of space. Private space ventures, they're exciting, yeah, but they spark these big debates. The main question becomes, okay, who actually gets to leave Earth? If there's a new frontier, who stays behind? Space used to be talked about as this big project for all humanity, right? Funded by taxpayers for the common good. Now there's a real risk it becomes just a playground for the ultra-rich. And that raises huge questions about fairness, about access to the future.
That's a really serious concern. If only billionaires can afford to go, or build the first moon bases or space hotels. What does that mean for everyone else? Does it just create a new kind of class divide, but like in orbit? Sounds like bad sci-fi.
Exactly. It raises these fundamental questions about equity, about access to whatever comes next. The whole idea of space as this universal commons open to everyone starts to feel pretty shaky. But there is a counter-argument, a less flashy but maybe equally important kind of democratization happening: CubeSats. These are tiny satellites, like shoebox-sized, often built with standard parts. Small countries, universities, even student groups can design, build, and launch them now. That was totally unthinkable back in the Cold War. So while private human spaceflight might seem elitist, private innovation is also, weirdly, making space more accessible for science and tech for a much wider group of people.
Huh. That's a really interesting contrast. You've got the super rich launching their own missions, but at the same time, a university in, say, Africa can launch its own small satellite pretty cheaply. It really shows how complex this whole new space economy is. Okay, so let's pull back a bit. Look at space in the modern world, how it's tangled up in everything from social media trends to serious international politics.
The whole new space movement has totally changed how we interact with space. Launches aren't just science news anymore. They're like carefully produced events designed to go viral on social media. Space exploration used to be pretty niche, mostly for scientists. Now it's mainstream entertainment. It's a huge source of national pride and, yeah, a big tool for corporate branding. Companies like SpaceX, with those dramatic rocket landings, they've totally mastered this, turning complicated engineering into thrilling, shareable video clips.
Right. It's not just engineers watching screens now. Anyone can watch a launch on YouTube, tweet about it, react instantly. But even with all this private activity, space is still a massive deal for national prestige. You look at countries like India, their Mars mission, their recent moon landing. Or China, their own space station, their moon missions bringing back samples. They're investing heavily in their own independent space programs. These are clear statements about their tech skills, their global ambitions. They're determined to be major players out there.
And this is happening right alongside private companies moving way beyond just launching stuff. They're openly talking about or planning things like moon mining, trying to get lunar ice for fuel, maybe building materials. They're eyeing asteroids for resources, thinking about the mineral wealth out there. And of course, space tourism is growing. Companies like Axiom Space want to build private modules on the ISS, maybe even private stations later. It's a real contrast. The old way, state-seeking glory, versus this new commercial race for actual resources, new markets in space. And that brings up really tricky questions about who owns what beyond Earth.
So we're not just talking flags anymore, we're talking mining claims, private habitats. It's a huge fundamental change. And you see pop culture reflecting how weirded out or excited society is about all this. Think about movies like Interstellar. It's all awe, human spirit, exploration. Then you get something like Don't Look Up, which is just pure dread about privatization, ignoring science, failing to deal with climate change here on Earth.
Those films are like a cultural thermometer, right?
Yeah.
Showing the hopes, the anxieties, the big fears people have about where space is headed. And public figures like Musk and Bezos, they get painted as either saviors taking us to Mars, solving huge problems, or villains, billionaires escaping Earth while it burns. Depends entirely on your social media feed or which news you read. These really polarized views show deeper anxieties and hopes about what space will be, a fresh start, or just Earth's problems exported.
And space itself, it's become this new, really important geopolitical playground. You see these massive satellite networks going up, like Starlink for global internet. That changes communication on Earth. At the same time, militaries are putting more assets in orbit, and there's this unsettling talk about space weapons, anti-satellite missiles, maybe even weirder orbital weapons. This is not just about who lands on the moon first anymore. It's about strategic advantage, spying, controlling vital global systems.
And then it creates these huge legal and ethical messes. We're forced to ask questions that we've never really had to answer before, like who actually owns lunar ice? Is it first come, first served? Or does it belong to everyone? And how do you enforce the Outer Space Treaty from 1967? You know, the one that says nations can't claim ownership of the moon or planets. How does that apply when private companies want to start mining? The strategic value of satellites for communication, for defense. It makes these questions incredibly urgent, and there are no easy answers in sight.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like the rulebook hasn't caught up with the game, and the game is moving fast. Speaking of rules and realities, let's unpack some common myths and maybe some hidden truths about space. First one you often hear, sounds nice and idealistic. Space is free for all, like it's this limitless frontier. But that's not quite accurate, is it?
No, it's definitely not the full picture. The truth is, while the 1967 Outer Space Treaty does ban nations from claiming sovereignty the U.S. can't declare ownership of the moon. It's surprisingly fuzzy about commercial rights, about extracting resources.
Yeah.
This ambiguity, it creates this big legal gray area that private companies are frankly eager to jump into. They can argue, okay, nations can't own the moon, but maybe we can own the resources we dig up. If that's not sorted out, you could end up with a real free-for-all. It's a major point of tension, a potential source of future conflict.
And that ambiguity could definitely lead to fights down the road. Who gets the good spots right?
Okay, another huge controversy around modern space. Space debris. Junk.
Yeah.
We're talking about these mega constellations like Starlink, launching thousands, maybe tens of thousands of satellites. The worry is they're just cluttering up Earth orbit with trash.
This is a critical issue, and it's getting worse fast. The sheer number of new launches, especially these huge constellations, dramatically increases the amount of orbital debris. There's this concept called the Kessler syndrome. A NASA scientist, Donald Kessler, proposed it. Basically, if there's enough junk up there, collisions could start a chain reaction. One collision creates more debris, which causes more collisions, until parts of Earth orbit become so crowded, so dangerous, they're basically unusable for satellites, for astronauts, for anything. And there are no clear international rules about who cleans it up or even how to prevent collisions effectively. It's like a ticking time bomb hanging over our heads. Real tragedy of the commons in space. That sounds genuinely terrifying. And like you said, not enough people are talking about it.
Okay, here's another hidden truth that kind of pushes back against the whole private enterprise narrative. A lot of these supposedly private rockets, they're actually heavily dependent on government money. Subsidies, huge contracts, even military funding. The line between public and private in space, it's way blurrier than most people think.
Absolutely. Take SpaceX. Yes, private company, founded by Musk. But a huge chunk of their business comes from massive NASA contracts, billions of dollars to fly astronauts to the ISS, to deliver cargo, even to develop the lander for future moon missions. Same with Blue Origin, Jeff Bezos' company. They do significant defense work. They compete for big government contracts. This isn't some pure free market thing where they're just funded by private investors. Taxpayers are still pouring significant money into these private ventures just through these complex contracts and partnerships. It really challenges that story of purely self-made entrepreneurial innovation. So yeah, when you see a private launch, it's not always entirely private. The government's hand, taxpayer money, it's often deeply involved. And just quickly, because it always comes up, there's that persistent conspiracy niche claiming the moon landings were faked.
Right, and it's important to counter that with straightforward, undeniable facts. We have hundreds of pounds of actual moon rocks. They're in labs all over the world, brought back by Apollo. Scientists everywhere study them. We have laser reflectors on the moon, placed by Apollo astronauts. We bounce lasers off them today to measure the moon's distance incredibly accurately. We even have high-res photos from orbiters showing the Apollo landing sites. You can see the lander bases, rover tracks. This is concrete, verifiable evidence.
Yeah.
It really underlines why critical thinking, checking facts is so important when people make big claims, especially about something like space exploration.
Absolutely. Facts matter. All right, let's shift now. What are the experts, the people really thinking about this stuff, saying? What are the main viewpoints, the debates about the future of space?
Well, on one side, you've got prominent figures, people like astrophysicist Neil deGrasse Tyson. They're generally very supportive of private sector involvement. They argue pretty strongly that private companies, because they're competing fiercely, focused on efficiency, iterating quickly, they just accelerate innovation. Faster than traditional government agencies, which could be slower, more bureaucratic. They see it as vital for making rapid progress, pushing tech boundaries faster. They often point to the speed of development at SpaceX as proof.
But it's not just about going fast, right? There are big ethical arguments on the other side.
Exactly. You have critics like Dr. Lucian Walkovich, an astronomer who really focuses on ethical science. They raise serious ethical questions. They challenge the focus on, say, colonizing Mars, basically building an escape plan for a few people while we ignore huge existential problems right here on Earth: climate change, poverty, resource depletion. It frames this core philosophical debate. Are we responsibly solving humanity's problems? Or are we just trying to run away from them, leaving most people behind? This view really pushes for a hard look at our motivations and the long-term consequences.
That's a really heavy, difficult question. And then you have some even more, maybe radical alternative ideas popping up in legal and philosophical circles.
Yeah, for instance, some legal scholars are pushing for a whole new space commons framework. The idea is basically collective management of space resources and territory. Instead of just letting private companies or nations grab whatever they can, they're talking about creating some kind of global governing body, maybe like a space UN, to prevent a free-for-all, make sure the benefits are shared fairly, or at least managed for the common good.
Wow, like a shared global management system for everything out there? It's a huge concept. Needs incredible international cooperation.
It really is. And then you have futurists, people like Peter Diamandis, who co-founded the X Prize. He sees asteroid mining as this radical, almost utopian fix for Earth's resource problems. He argues that if we can tap into the basically limitless mineral wealth in asteroids, platinum, rare earths, all sorts of stuff, it could totally change Earth's economy, move us from scarcity to abundance. These aren't just sci-fi dreams anymore. If these things happen, they have massive implications for how we live, how global politics works, could really usher in a new era.
So yeah, we're talking cosmic resource management, new economic models for Earth. It's not just fiction, it's active debate. Okay, let's ground this a bit with some real-world examples. Case studies showing these trends right now. A big one that really shook things up, is SpaceX's Falcon Heavy.
Oh, the Falcon Heavy with its reusable rocket tech. That's been an absolute game changer, totally disruptive. Unlike old rockets that were just used once and thrown away, the Falcon Heavy's side boosters can land themselves back on Earth after launch. Then they get fixed up and flown again. This reusability, it has slashed launch costs, made space access way cheaper, more competitive for businesses, even for governments. It's truly revolutionized the economics of the whole industry, forced everyone else to try and catch up.
And it's not just about launching cargo, it's about people too, for different reasons, like tourism. Blue Origin's New Shepard, that's a prime example there, right?
Yeah.
Focusing on those suborbital tourist flights.
Exactly. The New Shepard rocket, it's designed for these short hops, just past the edge of space, the Kármán line. It's really kicking off this new space tourism market. Now, yeah, it's definitely elitist right now, costs millions for just a few minutes of floating and looking at Earth. But it gets a lot of attention. Think about William Shatner, Captain Kirk himself, growing up at 90, became the oldest person in space. It was a huge media moment, showed the emotional, almost poetic side of space travel. So yeah, it highlights the playground for the rich angle, but it also holds out this promise of a future where maybe space becomes a destination for more than just astronauts, even if it's still a long way off for most of us.
And while the U.S. has this booming private scene, China's space program is very different. They're changing moon missions, their own space station. It's a totally different model.
China's change missions are a perfect example of how national pride, tech ambition, and strategic goals are still driving exploration in a purely state-run system. They've had amazing successes landing on the far side of the moon, bringing back lunar samples, building their Tiangong space station. It's all very top-down, government-controlled. And that's a real contrast to the more decentralized, private-heavy approach in the U.S. It shows completely different philosophies about developing space, and yeah, a clear competition for leadership, especially around the moon.
A totally different way of doing things, and maybe for different reasons, too. Okay, here's a curveball. Luxembourg. Tiny country in Europe, known for banking. But they're making big bets on asteroid mining rules.
It's fascinating, right? And incredibly forward-thinking for a small nation. Luxembourg basically decided to become a pioneer in space law. They created a legal framework specifically to attract companies interested in space resources. Back in 2017, they passed a law saying private companies could legally own resources they extract from space. Their goal is to be the legal and financial center for off-world mining, to draw innovators, investment. It really shows this global scramble for influence in the new space economy. Even small countries can find a big role if they're clever about policy and look ahead.
So you've got this global game playing out, huge national programs driven by prestige, small countries trying to write the rules for a whole new industry. And these different approaches, they're deeply connected to how different cultures see space, aren't they? What do these national stories look like?
Yeah, definitely. In the USA, space exploration often gets wrapped up in this idea of frontier mythology. Like it's a new manifest destiny, pushing outwards, just like the historical westward expansion. There's this deep-seated narrative about limitless opportunity, conquering new frontiers, that whole spirit of rugged individualism applied to space. It's about boldly going, not just in tech, but ideologically.
Okay, so it's tied to opportunity, pushing boundaries. What about Russia?
For Russia, figures like Gagarin, the cosmonauts, they still carry immense weight. They symbolize Soviet-era pride, this incredible legacy of being first. There's a strong nostalgia for that early dominance in the space race, a reminder of when they led the world in so many areas of space despite the political system. Their achievements are seen as proof of their engineering skill, their national strength.
And China. Their program is growing so fast. What's their story?
China's space program, especially their own station, their moon plans, it fuels huge national unity. It's a powerful symbol of their technological rise, their growing global ambition. It's a massive source of pride at home, showing China's arrival as a science and tech superpower. And it projects their increasing influence internationally, proving they have capabilities that only a couple of nations used to possess.
Beyond these big national stories, it feels really important to bring in other views too, especially from groups who often get left out of these grand narratives. Indigenous perspectives, for instance, often have a very different take.
Absolutely crucial. Many indigenous groups around the world, drawing on their traditional knowledge, their historical experiences, they see things like space mining or any kind of resource extraction off-world as just repeating the same patterns of exploitation and colonization we saw on Earth. They raise really deep ethical concerns. Are we just taking our bad habits, depleting resources, ignoring environmental impacts, feeling entitled to take whatever we want, and exporting them to space without learning anything from history? It forces us to ask, what does ethical expansion actually look like? Is it just more of the same old story, or can we do better?
And what about the global south? Their priorities often seem very different, much more practical.
Yeah, for many countries in the global south, think Nigeria, Brazil, others, their focus with satellite tech and space investment is way more down to earth, literally. They prioritize immediate needs, using satellites for better farming, boosting food security, monitoring climate change, predicting droughts or floods, helping with disaster response, improving communication in remote areas. Their space efforts are mostly about getting tangible benefits, solving real problems for their people right now here on Earth. It's less about prestige missions or commercial deep space ventures. It's like a different kind of space race focused on sustainable development.
These different cultural viewpoints completely change how you think about space, the policies, the ethics. It's not just what we do out there, but why we do it. And maybe most importantly, who actually benefits. Okay, let's try to pull this all together. A critical look, like a balance sheet. Who's winning? Who might be losing in this fast-changing space landscape?
Okay, on the plus side, the new space economy, with all that private competition, it definitely sparks rapid tech advances. The pressure to innovate fast, cut costs, deliver results, it's intense. And it leads to breakthroughs that might take way longer in slower government-run systems.
And we've seen the results directly, like with launch costs coming way down.
Exactly. Reusable rockets, streamlined manufacturing, fused competition. It's made space much more accessible financially to more players, not just superpowers. Plus, private missions are often more willing to take calculated risks. Governments, they have public accountability, political oversight, often more bureaucracy. They might avoid risks that private companies embrace. This allows for quicker testing, trying out new ideas. So yeah, the strengths point towards faster progress, more possibilities opening up for humanity in space.
But then there are some pretty big weaknesses, some emerging dangers we really need to watch out for. Maybe the biggest, like we talked about, is the fact that the rules haven't kept up. The regulatory lag.
Yeah, the legal and governance systems for space are seriously lagging behind the tech. The 1967 Outer Space Treaty. It feels increasingly inadequate for today's reality, especially on issues like space junk exploding, managing orbital traffic safely, and crucially, who gets the rights to space resources? Moon ice, asteroid minerals. It creates this dangerous legal void. Another huge concern is the shift in power toward billionaires. It raises fair questions about monopolies, about too much power concentrated in too few hands. Who really gets to decide the future of space? Is it a few super wealthy individuals whose personal visions might not match what's best for everyone? Or should it be a more collective global effort?
And then there's that ethical blind spot we touched on earlier. Are we really solving Earth's problems? Or just building fancy escape pods for the rich while leaving everyone else behind on a struggling planet?
These weaknesses, they highlight really significant challenges, potential pitfalls that could seriously undermine all the potential benefits of space exploration if we don't tackle them proactively, collaboratively, as a global community.
But on the other hand, amidst all the big visions and politics, we can't forget the real everyday benefits space exploration has already given us, stuff we often take for granted. These are direct spin-offs affecting millions.
Think about it. GPS guides us everywhere, powers countless apps, direct result of space tech. Weather forecasting helps us plan, protects us from storms, vital for farming. Totally reliant on satellites. Even medical imaging like MRI, C80 scans, saves lives, helps doctors, traces roots back to early space research innovations. So even if space sometimes feels far away, its impact is huge right here on Earth. It absolutely justifies the massive investment, both public and private, over the decades.
But if we don't get the rules sorted out, if we let that legal vacuum continue, there's a real danger of a Wild West scenario in space. Could lead to conflicts in orbit over resources, strategic positions, like a new Cold War, but fought overhead. And that brings us back to that crucial question tied so closely to problems here on Earth. Will only the wealthy, only the powerful, own the future of space? Will we just export inequality, a problem we struggle with constantly here, out into the cosmos?
Yeah, that really connects the abstract stuff, space policy tech, to very real consequences. It highlights how urgent it is to deal with these issues now before they become impossible to fix, potentially irreversible.
It feels clear that space tech, from those first beeping Sputniks to today's billionaire trips, it really holds up a mirror. It reflects our biggest ambitions, our amazing capabilities, but also our deepest divides, our toughest challenges as humans. Ultimately, the question of who controls space, it's not just about tech or money, it's really a question of who controls humanity's future, both here and potentially elsewhere.
And that leaves us with this huge choice, right? Almost an epoch-defining one. Are we going to decide, together, to treat the cosmos like a shared home, a common heritage for everyone, to be explored and used responsibly for the benefit of all? Or is it just going to become another place for the powerful to grab resources, stake claims, echoing some of the worst parts of our history here on Earth?
The next few decades feel absolutely critical, a real test of whether humanity can expand responsibly. Can we actually write new rules, forge new agreements, set new standards that genuinely balance our amazing dreams of exploration and progress with the absolute need for stewardship, for sustainability, for fairness?
These are not easy questions at all, and the answers will really define us. Should there be, a truly effective space UN to govern things, ensure fair access? How do we actively stop orbital class divides from happening?
Yeah.
Where your wealth or nationality determines if you benefit from space. And way down the line, if humans really do become multiplanetary, could totally new religions or philosophies emerge from living off Earth? Could it change what it even means to be human? What does citizenship mean if you're born on Mars and Earth is just a blue dot in your sky?
Wow. Those are the kinds of huge, mind-bending questions that make doing this deep dive so interesting, the story of space exploration. It's nowhere near finished. In a lot of ways, it feels like it's just getting started again in a new way. And no matter who's launching the rockets or who's buying the tickets, we are all ultimately still passengers together on this fragile, beautiful blue spaceship called Earth.